Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Smart Space Seminar Series at Oxford University's Said Business School. I'm Lucas Kello, an Associate Professor in International Relations here in Oxford, and I'll be moderating today's discussion on why space governance must go hand in hand with space innovation. With our panelists and the audience, we'll be exploring the broad relationship between technological and business innovation on the one side and governance and regulatory reform on the other. The discussion, like the seminar series more broadly, will explore the guiding notion of smart space. This is a concept that we developed within Oxford's space community to address ongoing transformations in the space sector. It seeks to challenge the traditional dichotomy between so-called old space, which encompasses government actors and capacities, and new space, which refers to the expanding and hugely diverse universe of private industry players. This much-used dichotomy pervades in thinking about the space domain, and in some regards, the separation of the two worlds of government and industry makes sense. After all, the two worlds encompass very different types of actors with divergent interests, aims, motivations, and capacities. But the distinction is also increasingly artificial. One of the central trends in today's space economy is the growing convergence between the government and industry worlds. Sometimes the convergence manifests as a fruitful synthesis, other times as a clash. The national space agencies increasingly rely on private actors such as SpaceX to assist in or even perform basic functions like human transport into space that were traditionally reserved exclusively for the national agencies. At the same time, the private sector is greatly affected by government regulations and laws in its scope of activities. Often the problem is not one of bad or outmoded regulation, but rather the absence of clear regulation in realms of commercial activities such as space tourism or space debris mitigation that are new or emerging. So the notion of smart space urges us to consider the growing synthesis between these two worlds. It asks us to weigh important questions in the direction of a more effective synthesis. What is the private sector's changing role in developing and integrating new technologies into space systems within governance regimes that are traditionally privileging government actors? What are the main obstacles to closer cooperation between private industry and national space agencies in the development of new space commerce? So to explore these and related questions, we've gathered here today three excellent speakers working in various areas of space science and entrepreneurship. We have with us Gabriele De Cagno. He is the Transformation Officer at the European Space Agency. What a fantastic and inspiring title that is, where he led the development of the roadmap to leverage AI for the automation of space operations. He's responsible for the implementation of AI in current as well as future space missions. And he's also the coordinator of the ESA lab at Oxford, where he manages collaborations between the agency and the University of Oxford. We also have with us Bosco Lai, who is the co-founder and CEO of Little Place Labs. His company makes satellites smarter by enabling edge computing and machine learning. It's also the AWS Challenge champion in the Global Gravity Challenge 03 organized by Deloitte. Bosco is a member of the Oxford Executive MBA cohort here close to home. We're glad to have you here to learn from your almost 20 years of experience working as an executive and entrepreneur. And thirdly, we have with us today Lynette Tan, who's an active promoter of STEM interest among youths and women. Indeed, for her efforts and accomplishments in 2018, she received the Lancôme Visionary Award and was also recognized as a trailblazer on the inaugural Singapore 100 Women in Tech list in 2020. I think she's gone quite far in putting Singapore on the space industry map. So welcome to you here today. It's excellent to have you here with us. Now, before turning to the speakers, I want to say a brief procedural word about questions. We have with us a wide and diverse audience, and I want to make sure that we integrate you into the discussion. So I invite audience members to submit written questions in the platform through which you're joining us. Let me now turn to our first speaker, Gabriele.
Thank you very much, everyone. Thank you very much, Lucas and the team at Said Business School for inviting me tonight. It's a pleasure, and I'm very happy that I can try to explain to you a little bit also my perspective here. In the introduction, Lucas, you talked about the dichotomy between the old and the new space, and I'm very happy that you mentioned this because I very much relate to the idea that you are proposing. So this is not just these are not two separate entities, but these are actually working together. And to enable new space, what I would define traditional space is key. It is extremely important, and it is a true enabler for that. And in fact, even if with new space we are witnessing more and more developments across several dimensions, I think that existing and established spacecraft programs will not disappear, and they will still be vital to the new space ecosystem. In general, I think taking the framework proposed by Golkar et al., I think a new space can actually be considered across 6 dimensions. And I talk about new space in the sense that even if it is a transition, we can still clearly define some specific pillars, some specific features that differentiate this. One is a product. So we've seen that new space companies are really bringing in new products in the market. In terms of hardware, in terms of software, we can think about renewable, reusable rockets. We can think about software applications using novel technologies. Then we have another element, is a process. What we see is that new space companies typically use a different way of working. This is a paradigm shift, and also agencies, national and international agencies, need to adopt this. Specifically, working agile. This is fundamental in order to allow for quick iterations and ensure that things can be done. This also inevitably allows, has a risk connected to it, but this is something that in order to ensure speed, we should take into account. The other thing is within the process is vertical integration or horizontal integration. So the fact that we see that new players are really trying to redefine the scattered landscape that used to be in the past, and really trying to see to integrate vertically and horizontally to make the process even faster. Another pillar is funding. Historically, it was mainly national and international agencies that were supporting the businesses. But what we see now is that there's a huge increase in the amount of funding also coming from private capital, VCs, angel investors in general. So private funding that flows into new startups. We heard today about the announcement, for instance, of a very nice European reality, the exploration company that raised several million euros, 40 million euros, and this was a stellar achievement for a European new space startup. Another dimension is a market. Typically, this is very much related to funding, but the market was just not really there. So it was the agencies that were, and governments in general, they were providing the funding, and they were the customers. What we are witnessing now is that there are more and more companies that are also part of the ecosystem, that are also part of the market. So we have agencies, governments, as well as private companies. Another pillar is a business model, and this is actually related to doing and proposing their products in a different way. This is something that we've seen in software as a service, and that they are really applying this to the extreme of space as a service. We've seen AWS with ground stations as a service. We've seen recently also ISI with the spacecraft as a service, operations as a service. So we are really witnessing a paradigm shift. Last but not least, it is technology. This is the 6th pillar and the sixth element of this framework. And what we are seeing is that new space companies are really bringing in new and novel technologies. One that I'm very passionate about is artificial intelligence. So in all this landscape where we can clearly define some features that are peculiar of new space companies, what can be the role of national and international agencies? I think within ESA we've taken this very seriously. Recently, now more about 2 years ago, the ESA Agenda 2025 was proposed by our Director General, and that is really distilling the vision for ESA. And one of the key elements is commercialization. And I think ESA is really taking this seriously and really trying to allow new space companies to flourish. Within ESA, we have a network of about 25 business incubator centers. These are centers that allow companies to founders to develop their own ideas and then grow and become a more stable company. In total, within the BICS, we are approaching or we've passed 1,200 startups across Europe. This is a huge number, and what the agency wants to do is to ensure that these startups can receive all the necessary support in terms of funding, in terms of support to the network of SMEs, but also in terms of protecting the IP. We have a dedicated office that is really looking into technology transfer and patents for that. But also within this aspect, we have a network of ESA labs. These are non-funding schemes between universities typically and ESA that allows for exchange of expertise, and also to allow low TRL activities. And I think this is actually very important. We are now developing a network of labs for disruptive technologies. So all in all, ESA is really taking this seriously. For me, what I think is very important in this scenario is the fact that the ESA has a clear set of added values. First of all, people may not know, but so I'm from the European Space Operations Center, and we say where missions come alive. And this is the place where what we do is we operate the missions and spacecraft, but everything starts from early on, from mission design, mission concept to mission preparation. And then also we have a dedicated department that is looking at space safety. So all words that I think may resonate to the people that are listening to us tonight. And what in our department, in our directorate, what we have is that for every euro that is being given to ESA, the output is 3 euros. So this is a multiplier effect that ESA has. And the way it does this is by de-risking the new technologies, by really ensuring the new companies can join the space, this new space ecosystem. Also, we allow and we provide expertise and access to our tech facilities and labs, and we promote adoption. I would like to talk more about my work specifically related to the artificial intelligence for automation roadmap, but maybe I can discuss this later on. So I give the floor back to Lucas. Thank you.
Thank you, Gabriele, for those insightful comments. I think what you said resonates very closely with the smart space paradigm. On the one hand, you highlighted the important point that traditional space programs will not disappear, and indeed they will remain vital in the future space economy. On the other, however, you also emphasized important trend shifts in the sector, right? So the emergence of new funding streams involving VCs and other private sector actors. National governments are not anymore the sole primary or most important providers of funding, even though in many respects, of course, they do remain important. You also spoke about, I think very interestingly, the fact that the market in many respects of the space economy didn't really exist, right? And it's still now emerging, and it's precisely because of the appearance of these new actors that are very much, in some regards, empowered by new technologies. And we know from the history of technological innovation that it often calls forth new governance paradigms, right? Not least because of the new kinds of actors with different interests and resources, which perhaps didn't feature prominently in the original governance regime. And we know that that's certainly the case with respect to the space industry. So thank you very much for that. A reminder to our audience that we welcome your written questions, and when you submit them, please try to identify yourselves with your name and your affiliation and location. Next, I turn to Bosco.
Hi, thank you. Glad to be here. So again, this is Bosco, and hello from Houston, Texas in the US. So I'm the co-founder and CEO of an early stage space analytics startup called Little Place Labs. We're about 2 years old, and as Lucas mentioned earlier, we're born right at the heart of the Sci Business School at Oxford. Our founding team met together a few years ago at the executive MBA program, and we came from very different backgrounds culturally and more importantly, professionally. We're mostly from the commercial sector, previously with limited space, experience in the old space paradigm, and obviously now has become a part of this great new space movement. A little bit about Little Place Labs. Our highest purpose is to make this world a better place with space technology. And the specific area that we focus on is to help our customers who need to respond in and take action in near real time and very time sensitive situation by providing them with near real-time insights and analytics. So some examples are quick detection of disasters like fire, floods, real-time surveillance of threats and illegal activities, and national security applications. And from a technology point of view, just a little bit more, we are a software company. We focus on machine learning applications that can process large amount of data on satellites and other space infrastructure. And by doing that, we eliminate the need of downlinking a lot of the data from space to ground, which is really the cause of a lot of the latency and cost today in some of the applications. So in general, this is a very nascent and new area within the new space paradigm, which we call space edge computing or in-orbit processing. So again, very happy to share our experience here as an early stage commercial innovator. So piggyback of what I've heard just now, I think there are a lot of good things that are happening in this new space paradigm, especially with the support of the public entities, whether it's the government or the space agency around the world. And I can split that, those good things that we are kind of benefiting from as an early stage company into non-monetary and monetary. So first of all, for the non-monetary part, the defense sector, no matter what country you look at, are absolutely the biggest customer of space technology today. And it's by far the biggest, especially in the US, the DoD, and in the UK, the MOD, and other countries. So traditionally, what the problem is, we know that they are the biggest consumers and biggest customers of our solutions, but we don't really understand what exactly do they need. What are their problems behind the doors? A lot of this information has been classified, or you really have to be within the community, has been working with these agencies for a long time to really understand what the problems are. And the agencies itself right now recognize that we can't do that. To promote innovation and really bring these innovators or innovative solutions in-house and collaborate, they really need to first open the door and let people see what are they struggling with. So in other words, the agency itself has been doing a lot by organizing events, what they call reverse industry events across the board, no matter if it's the Air Force or the Space Force or the Army. And also they have created specific sections that are called Open Door. So they have actually created a team and a branch over the agency that is called Open Door for people like us. Again, it doesn't matter we're a Lockheed or a Little Place Labs, which is an earlier player, to just ping them and say, hey, this is what we're doing. This is our story. That's our vision. Does it ring a bell? Does it resonate with anything that you're seeing behind the door? And these are all free, right? These are all very open invite sections. So we definitely benefit a lot by just going to this session and listening to the people behind the door, understanding what is going on. The other thing I think I just heard people mention is, again, the private and public sector, coming together, right? SpaceX and NASA, classic example, but there are more. We have heard again and again from the agency, the top line argument is, why do you have to build everything by yourself? Buy what you can, right? Obviously, there's limitation on where you buy and how you buy it. But again, if the framework is in, if the door is open, buy what you can and build what you can't buy. That oftentimes is the quickest way to get to the solution and the capabilities that they need. Of course, we know that space compared to other technology in other areas could take a little bit longer in terms of building out the solutions that work. A lot of trial and proving in that space. So buy what you can and incorporate those solutions and build what you need to build to come up with that capability quick enough. The other thing that I want to mention that is fantastic to see is the international collaboration. Again, not just agency versus agency versus agencies. We are talking about in the commercial sector. To date, a lot of the projects and demonstrations that we have involve other partners, and they are from different countries, right? And it's really amazing to see how open people and companies are. Again, doesn't matter if they are a more mature company or a startup like us, to really collaborate. Forget about where you're from. Forget about what you have been doing. This is essentially a critical time for everyone to come in and promote their piece and bring in their element to build that holistic solution, whether it's for defense or for commercial use case. So very promising collaboration there. And then also as an early stage company, right? Obviously, we will need guidance and support on the technology side. How do we build all these technological solutions? But we are effectively a startup. There's a lot of things that we need to think about from a company point of view. How do we hire people? How do we do projection? How do we think about commercialization, product roadmap? All these things, traditionally are more focused. The support, especially for space tech startups, are more focused on the technology. But now we are seeing that change. Other than just technology-based programs, there are a lot of programs that are funded by the government in the US, in the UK, and a lot of other companies that are really focused on commercialization. We're actually part of a UK space agency and another entity called Satellite Catapult program right now. And all we do is we don't talk about the technology. We don't talk about the machine learning and the code. We talk about where are my customers? How do we commercialize it? How do we think about planning and budget and all that? Very, very important. And then obviously the other bucket or the other side is money, right? So we all absolutely money before, I know that the private investment pool has been growing. We're talking about just about $300 billion that got invested in commercial space entities so far. But we're early stage, like us, we need some funding to help a kickstart. So we are seeing a lot more of those programs coming up. For example, in the US, there is what we call the SBIR, which is the Small Business Innovation Research, that are providing a lot of funding year in, year out through different agencies. Again, the DoD, NASA, again, for people like us to go and apply. And again, through that, understand what the problems are. In the UK, obviously, Innovate UK, there's a lot of programs, and with ESA, absolutely a lot. So there's a lot of good things that are happening where the government and public side of things are trying to tie in and bring in commercial players like us and to promote kind of that growth and collaboration. But there are a lot of things that doesn't work. Obviously, it's not roses, and I can talk a little bit about that as we go on.
Thanks very much, Bosco, for this very insightful comments. I think, again, reaffirming the core message of the smart space paradigm, right, which has to do with the increasing synthesis and increasing need for a guided synthesis, right, between old space and new space. And I mean, one of the things that really strikes me from what you said was the relations with the defense sector, right? So, and the necessity that you observe in your own work for the defense sector to open its doors and lift the veil of classification in order to foster and facilitate that closer relationship, right, between public and private partners, which of course raises very interesting questions of trust amongst defense organizations and private entities, many of them like yours that are early stage commercial innovators and simply haven't had haven't been able to enjoy, right, a long time of interaction to build that trust. And we know from the history of the development of public-private partnerships in other sectors that time and continued interaction are very important in that process. So thank you very much. And now, yet another reminder for the audience, we welcome your written questions, so please submit them through the platform. Next, I turn to Lynette.
Hi, good evening, everyone. Hope this sound is clear for you. Thank you for having me here. I'm Lynette. I'm now in Singapore, so it's a little bit, not so bright over here. But I understand it's the same over there in the UK. So really a real privilege to be invited to this discussion here, and in a very interesting topic coming at a very, very right time. I work with this very closely in the Singapore private space sector, but Singapore is a rather small country, but they have is a hotbed, for many space innovation and startups and private enterprises. And I work closely with them in Singapore, or even if they are based overseas out of Singapore, but with an interest in the Asia Pacific market and how to navigate that. I also run a space faculty. I'm the managing director there, and I look into talent and pipeline development. And I think a lot of us in the space industry can feel that there's a very acute area that's in need for attention, because that's the space industry is growing, and there's been impressive figures, and accomplishments cited by my previous, friends on this panel. There is also a need for talent in this sector that seems to the layman quite far away, but actually it's quite.
Lynette, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but we're getting quite a bit of static from you. Do you want to try and adjust your audio settings?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Just feel free to interrupt me if you hear any noise.
That's much better. Much better. Thank you.
Great. Yeah. So I think it's quite an important development area. Talent pipeline.
Sorry, Lynette. It was good for a moment, and then the static returned.
Okay.
I'm not sure what you did there.
Now. Okay. Let me just try.
Do you want to? Oh, we're still getting the static.
Really?
I was using a mic to make it clearer, but it's not working. How about now? I'm just going to use a
Okay, it's a bit different, possibly better. Apologies to the audience for this technical problem. But Lynette, why don't you just continue to speak, and I think we can more or less make out what you're saying.
Yeah. Okay, but just stop me if it's not clear. Okay, so and I think one of the things with the UK space sector, in tandem with the growth globally in the space sector, is this kind of rapid growth, and we're seeing, I think in UK you have about 38,000 or more people employed in the space industry, and with an ambition to capture 10% of the global market. I think that's very impressive, and I think that's a good stimulus as well for the community and the industry and sectors in UK and its neighboring countries to also learn how to collaborate and work together. Now, I'm going to talk a little bit more, with my very close interactions with the private space sector on some of these developments and trends that I see, and then bringing us back today to this topic on space governance, which is important. So I'm very interested in tackling and looking and capitalizing on this growing market, right? And in a sector that's worth now almost $400 billion in the last report by Space Foundation. And in that sense, it makes the public and private market investment, which is at an all-time high in 2021 at 10 billion, it makes it pale in comparison. But that's a significant investment. 10 billion of fresh capital in 2021 during COVID for space companies to work with. Bearing in mind that in just 2012, 10 years ago, private sector money was just barely 300 million US dollars. Right? So impressive growth of investments into the market, and also impressive growth overall in the space industry. So I think what would work well for many of these new space companies are a few things, right, that could see that they will be successful. And we are thinking of being part of this sector, or trying to understand more of this sector. I think these are trends that are quite important to note. They've also been a bit of a shift in the last few years of what has been good investable products and companies in the market, right? So I think what remains clear, even more clear, is the near-term revenue potential from both public and private customers. So, the space agencies, the government, but also, near-term revenue potential from private customers. In the past, it was possibly okay to go and pitch and talk about a bit far off revenue potential from the private sector, but these days, everyone is very eager to get near-term revenue potential, and a very clear, crystal clear path to generate significant growth, especially with having had almost a decade or 2 decades of new space developments. Everyone's kind of figured out how things won't work, and there's an assumption that therefore there should be more clarity on how growth will be generated. And of course, still what is really important is having proprietary technology. They want to have something unique, a competitive advantage, a moat. I think that's quite standard across all tech industry, where a space company trying to grow in the sector will need to have a very strong proprietary technology. And I think what has come to the fore is also proven leadership teams. In the early stages, there were new people coming on board, very limited experience. But what they've also seen is when you have a proven leadership team, success is just so much nearer. And I think Gabriel cited the exploration company. And Helene, the founder, is a very, very well respected leader in the space community and even outside. A strong network and global connections. And I think really did a very great job with a 40 million euro Series A investment as well. Of course, leaders like Bosco's traveling the world, hitting the ground and getting the job done. Very strong leadership team is becoming very, very important now in ensuring and making sure the startup or the company is successful, right? And then of course we talk about space for Earth having clear commercial applications, and therein also creates this place now where many people are running into it. Very capable people, very capable technologies, very novel technologies with new ways of working. And I think that's how we need to have now a greater need for strong governance in space. The new governance paradigm in space with the new developments, right? And we do want to welcome commercial developments, new technologies, and developments, of course, continuing from the state and from government funds. But we now have an even stronger imperative to make sure that space is sustainable and it remains accessible. NASA says there's now possibly 9,000 tons of space debris in Earth's orbit. As we're going more into space for Earth and space for space, there's going to be just so much more interactions between many different parties. And we know how challenging that can be in so many terrestrial, Earth platforms. You see where different leadership comes in to create a unified way of working. That is also going to be very, very important to be successful, to have in space a strong governance. So I'm very happy to be here on this panel. We're excited to take the questions and have a very robust discussion and debate with my fellow panelists.
Thank you very much, Lynette, for those insightful remarks. I mean, you spoke about the huge influx of capital that's entering the sector, which I think can be synthesized with some of the things that we've heard from the earlier two speakers, right? I mean, Bosco, for example, mentioned the importance of closer, improved, and more open relations between the private sector and the security and defense sector. So if that relationship is going to be strengthened in order to facilitate even more money coming into the sector or being applied in the most innovative fashion, right? Then we need to think about something that I know is prominent in the mind also of Gabriele, and it's also, I know, Lynette, prominent in your mind because you mentioned it, which is the necessity for governance reform. And so to kick off the question and answer session of this seminar, I want to start by posing a question to you, and you can each take a couple of minutes to answer it in your own way. And the question is the following. From the perspective in which you work in the sector, if you were to be given the full power of the legislature, or perhaps you want to think at the international level, say, you have full authority or influence at the high table of diplomacy, because perhaps you want to reform the outer space treaties provisions. But if you had that power and influence, and if you could select one crucial reform within the existing governance or regulatory framework, which one would it be? Again, from the perspective in which you work, and I realize that your perspectives are very different. Let's start with you, Gabriele.
Thank you very much, Lucas. I think this is a very interesting question, and to me, I've not had much time to think about it, but since I was the first one asked me to answer, but I think given my role at ESOC, if I were this opportunity, I believe it would be related to space debris management and tracking. And specifically, I think, these days we are still relying on US inputs quite significantly to track all the pieces of debris and to help us avoid potential collisions. And, we need to ensure that there's more transparency, that we can democratize access to this type of data, even if some is clearly classified. We need to think about a solution to ensure this. And one of the ways I would think of is to ensure that through common standards we can actually enable this. ESA has been at the forefront of standardization for decades now, and even for artificial intelligence, we're now working on having a qualification procedure. We are working closely with industry to really feed back all the different inputs to really ensure that we can actually get a better understanding of how we can qualify machine learning solutions and algorithms and get rid of this black box effect. And I think, taking what we are doing there and trying to apply similar standards to a problem that is related to space debris, I think this would be something I would really believe in.
So, Gabriele, you didn't have much time to think of an answer to my question. You were surprised by it, but I think actually your answer was very good, because I think you rightly emphasized in some of what you said the space debris issue area, right? And I mean, I know from my own work that there are a number of private companies that are eager to enter that particular aspect of the space industry. They have the knowledge and they have the resources and the other capacities, human skills and so forth, in order to do an important job in the mitigation of space debris. But they often are reluctant to enter the space because of unclear regulations. And we know, of course, that market uncertainty about things like legal liabilities when things don't go as planned can be a huge inhibitor, right, to the development of business activities. So, okay, Bosco, what answer do you have for us? And I suspect that it might have something to do with government secrecy laws.
I was supposed to actually talk about space debris, and just to add on that, I think the uncertainty it's bad in one way, but it's actually creating a lot of opportunities. When the new requirements and the new regulations across the globe finally comes out, I think companies that have been looking at this and working on it from an R&D perspective will be very well positioned. And I think this is kind of like I look at this and I often think about the problem with renewable energies or climate change, right? At the early stage, yes, no one people understand that there's a problem, but there's no action, and because of why? Because these companies, as Lynette was pointing out, if you are a company that is working solely on space debris, whether you're building a robotic arm that can grab dead satellites and whatnot, the product and the payback, it's a long time. It's a long time from now. So the investment or the investors that you need to bring into those companies is very different from your traditional private money. So where are they going to get that money to start doing the R&D? And when the regulation comes in, you can actually now take action and really kick the tires going. So that's a very interesting bit. But yes, to your point, I talked about earlier how the government, the DoD are opening up the doors for us to walk in the room. But don't get me wrong, you're kind of like walking into the room of red tapes all around, right? It's kind of like you're in the room, but where do you go, right? Where's my next step without triggering something? Last week, I was just at a Air Force sponsored event. Again, one of these reverse industry events. And there was one section where that person is really talking about innovation and how they bring innovators in and all that. And for 30 minutes that he was talking, there was only one slide behind him. It's a spaghetti map of 200 gates that you have to go through, from proposing a solution to becoming a predominant solution within defense. And it's ridiculous. I took a picture with my high resolution phone. I couldn't even see what the words are because it's so convoluted. So again, there is a lot more work to do after they have opened the door, right? To help us understand what are the check boxes, what do we need to do, what's not important, what are the tips that you can just remove and chuck it out. At the end of the day, because defense is very tied to space, space is also very tied to classified information and all that. There will be red tapes. We're not naive enough to think that it's going to be fully commercialized, like a lot of the other sectors. But we can do better in that, and we are seeing that. So I'm very hopeful. And just one more point, which I heard Leonard mention. To me, new space is really not just about space. It's not just about sending astronauts up to space, firing up big rockets. A lot of the areas, especially for us or companies like us, we are looking for ground users, ground use cases that can utilize space technology. And one thing that I have seen, there's a lot of programs out there, as we all talk about, that would provide funding and research support for space company to develop the space technology. But there's a lack of program and support to teach ground end users or potential end users. Why isn't there a program out there that goes, hey, agriculture user, have you actually heard about space tech? Do you know what space tech can do for you? That is very important because until you actually educate the end users where the revenue is going to come from for all these space for ground applications, it's hard for us to commercialize. Like if we have to go to each end user and to teach them about satellite, about insights, about pricing, and about how you can use it, it's a very, very slow process. And a lot of the companies with limited balance sheet, it's not going to survive. So I think the education and the support has to go beyond just the space sector, but going out and teaching people why should you be looking at space technology and solutions today. It doesn't matter what sector you're in.
Thank you, Bosco. I think some very important points there at the end about new educational initiatives. I mean, and also unsurprisingly, earlier in your comments, you focused on the seemingly excessive red tape in relations with the defense sector. And I think an important and bigger point emerges from that. And we often think of the space industry as a single or holistic industry, but in reality, we're dealing with subsectors, right? And so private companies that want to develop a special relationship with the security and defense sector are going to face different governance obstacles, and therefore are going to require different regulatory reforms than, say, those private entities that are working with other domains of public life. Say a company that's working with civilian communications activities, right? And so I think that's a very important point to consider, and I think it comes across quite poignantly, at least implicitly, in your comments about the obstacles to cooperation with the defense sector. Lynette, what big reform do you have for us?
Well, how about, okay, let me know if I'm not clear. So, I think that's a really great question. What big reform? But maybe that sounds too political. So I'm going to say, what if we could all have a, one wish with the genie, right? And say, what do we want to see happen in the space sector? And I think what I would wish is, if I could be greedy, I'll say, I think we do rely a lot on the government, especially the perception of having to work with the defense sector to, achieve commercial goals. If that could miraculously be delinked, it would be amazing, right? In that, we would then have not just about rate tapes, but the kind of governance that is required for mass consumerization, civilized, silver entities using space, and then getting other stakeholders involved in the discussion and on the table. Because what happens so many times is, the defense sector gets a very large stake in what gets decided, and then that steers all the governance, the policies. That has a very strong impact. It's, I don't know if it's going to happen in my lifetime. I'm not betting on it, but just for discussion's sake here, right? That's what we're having. I would like things to be separated, right? And then a way of working in the space sector to bring, professional stakeholders, the lawyers, the governors, the politicians could come in, and then define and decide how things would go. I think then if I were to have my second wish, actually, it would be really nice if politics is also taken out from all these discussions, right? It's just a lot of, the space sector is big, but it's also not big, right? We have to work on the global market. We have to work, across geographies. We have to work with many different players. And when the politics come in, it's like, sovereign interest, national interest, it does get into the way of coming up with the common law, the common understanding that makes effective space collaboration with the public sector, within the private sector. I apologize. So, if we could wish for that kind of reform, it's quite a political word here, it would really be very helpful. But I think what we can realistically do is, going when we into the United Nations discussions, or G2G platforms and discussions, right? Work on first principles, right? Take out underlying assumptions. We're going into a discussion and negotiation with very experienced veterans, senior leaders, and they come with preconceived notions, right, from their previous experience. But the space could require new guidelines, new understanding, new modus operandi, new ways of working. And so I think what we could actually do is, when we go into these negotiations, platform, roundtable, symposiums, try to take out some of these underlying preconceived notions and we might have, and really see how to make the governance, how to make policies, how to make frameworks work in the space context. So what we do now in going in is, we reference this, we've done this before. And it doesn't help. It really, really doesn't help in a very complicated landscape already. So, so that's what I would wish, at least for stakeholders who are now involved in these discussions, sitting on the table, at least strip something away from you, take out some of your experiences. It might not necessarily be helpful.
Okay, so I'm hearing you say, at least partly, that it's important to remove politics, at least from elements of the equation here, right? In terms of the development of public-private partnerships, because after all, political imperatives might not align neatly. Indeed, they might clash with commercial imperatives, right? Now, this I think leads me nicely to one of the questions from the audience that I want to turn to next, because it's about the harmonization of space innovation, right? So the question is, how can public-private partnerships play a role in fostering a harmonized approach to space innovation and governance? So a broad question, but perhaps we can tie it into some of the themes that we've been discussing so far. And I want to return to you, Gabriele, on this question. What perspective can you offer, perhaps from your work at ESA or elsewhere?
Yeah, thank you very much. I think this is actually a very interesting question, and I believe that the agency is really working towards being more open and try to engage with the key stakeholders. And I think this is also going hand in hand with what Lynette has just mentioned, in the sense that we are really trying to engage with the people that will be using, that are really disrupting this new sector, and we are taking their feedback seriously. So one of the example I would like to can think of is, for instance, when we developed this new roadmap for the use of artificial intelligence for automating mission operations. First of all, we did this in collaboration with industry. So we wanted to have key players with us, trying to think about what are the areas that could be used, what are the aspects, what are the pain points. Starting from the pain points, we eventually defined a business case, and from that we then ended up with a roadmap. Is really setting a North Star, that is really providing a coherence and a guidance to the future developments of AI applications in mission operations. And once we developed it, we were like, okay, fine, we have involved a few key players, but let's try to validate this further. So what we did was to really have both one-on-ones with companies ranging from what we call LSI, large system integrators, to medium-sized companies to small, medium enterprises, and really challenge it and see if they were keen on adding anything else. And I think this type of dialogue is fundamental, because in the end, the agency is successful, and especially ESA. I mean, ESA has the mandate to foster the European growth and to foster growth in general in the European space ecosystem. And to achieve this, we need to talk to the key players. We need to talk to the people that will be using, that will be developing this, especially now that, as mentioned by all the other panelists as well, and as well as in my intro, the market is not just space agencies, it's not just governments, but it is the whole private sector, is business to business, new startups that are relying on each other to develop new products. So this type of dialogue, I think, is fundamental. And I'm very happy that the agency is really in the process of engaging this more systematically and at scale.
Thank you, Gabriele, for that valuable perspective. And now, in the few minutes that we have left with us, I want to synthesize a couple of questions that I see in the audience chat box here. And they relate to some of the important themes that Bosco has been discussing about relations between the public and private sectors in defense matters, right? So one of our questioners would appreciate it if you could share more about the acquisition process in the Department of Defense, or MOD, in the UK. And someone else asked about new initiatives that exist in the defense sector for private sector companies. What can you tell us, Bosco, about the acquisitions process, and how might it be, because we want to be forward-looking and constructive, how might it be made more effective?
Look, I think the agencies and the department have already done quite a lot, as I mentioned earlier, to promote problems and try to facilitate some of these conversations through specific acceleration programs, or this inverse or reverse industry days. So if you're just talking about the US, I can think about 20 to 30 different organizations, some for profit, some non-profit, that exactly are helping private companies to tie in and work together with the government. Again, not just even for defense. So bar everything, it's a bit different, which is quite annoying, because you can't really just say, I understand how it works with one agency, and that's kind of how it works with another. It's completely different. They speak different languages. But there are support out there. So what I would say is, be on the lookout, sign up for newsletters, sign up to be part of those associations, attend, events, and just be out there, because it's not, a lot of times when you go into those events and be part of those webinars, it's not really about the slides and the step 1 to 10. It's also about meeting people, having a chat, after the session, after the event, build that relationship. Best conversations happens in those conversations, not really just a one-way dialogue. So I think as much as, again, we can ask the Defense Department or the government to do their part, we as commercial players also need to think about how can we utilize some of the support out there, and also provide feedback to them in different settings.
And if I can just prod you to elaborate a little bit further on the potential problem here. I mean, in tying into some of the things you also said earlier about the necessity for new educational initiatives. I mean, do you see part of the problem having to do with the new kinds of AI and machine learning technologies, and they simply being developed and implemented at such a rapid pace that people working in the defense industry, in defense ministry, within the military, simply lack, right, the educational tools, right, to make sense of these transformations and to figure out how they might fit within their scope of activity in the sector?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, anything that's new and scary that comes out, people will be concerned and worried, and think about what is the risk of adopting it. I think Gabriele nodding his head, and I'm sure he agrees to that. I mean, it's like GPT, right? ChatGPT came out, and there's so much debate about how dangerous this thing is, right? People don't tend to think about how powerful can this thing be, and how do we make sure that it doesn't cause harm more than the good. So again, when we talk about broadly AI, ML, and solutions like that, there is still quite a lot of concern and holdback in completely collaborating. But again, that's going to change, because within different agencies, within different departments, we are already seeing special task force or task team being formed specifically on these issues. Like, ESA is obviously developing or already have a team that is specifically looking at how to use data and whatnot. So it is still going to be a challenge, even as simple as, how do you ensure cybersecurity and data privacy? You're not just talking about from ground, you're talking about from space to ground, or from space to space. A lot of this is still up in the air, requires regulation and good actors to come in and do their part. But I think it is getting attention. It's just that it requires everyone to hold tight and really work things out.
Thank you, Bosco. So, ladies and gentlemen, we've reached the end of our time for this seminar. My apologies to the audience members who submitted questions that we didn't address. We got a lot of very interesting questions. We just didn't have time to address them all. But we've heard today about new funding streams and capital flows in the space sector, new technological innovations, new actors and capacities, and perhaps most importantly, we heard about the necessity for governance and regulatory reforms to guide and facilitate the smart space fusion, as we call it. So thank you very much to Gabriele De Canio from ESA, Bosco Lai from Little Place Labs, and Lynette Tan from Singapore, for joining us today and for sharing your insights and experiences. Thank you very much also to our audience members for joining us today. Have a good evening.